14 people were shot at a bar over the weekend in St. Paul, Minnesota, leaving one woman dead. She was a 29-year-old veterinarian. And Ben, we're looking at this information, this one shooting that injured 14, left one dead, while also examining information from the CDC that's saying America saw a 30% increase in the number of homicides, which is the largest increase in homicides in modern history. And so one thing is for certain, that this pandemic has definitely caused people to become more violent. And the question we're all asking ourselves is, how do we put an end to community violence?
George, I was looking at that story, and that's the essential question, right? If we cut down to it, I'm thinking of my friend Jamal Green in Chicago as he cries out about everything that's happening in Chicago. There is violence that is amongst us in the midst of all the tragedy that's already happening. It's almost like tragedy compounded upon tragedy, because in the midst of this pandemic, where I understand a lot of people are hurt and broken, but there's still violence on top of that. And I think that's because we live in an inherently violent country.
Yeah. And when you pair that with the school shootings, I know about a month ago, there was a quadruple homicide. There was a vehicle found on the side of the road in Wisconsin with 4 people who were shot in the head, 4 young people, all under the age of 40, and many of them which had children, and no clear motive as to why. And so when you continuously see this type of heinous violence, you know, we've discussed ways to mitigate the excessive force that's used by police, but how do we get to the core of this issue when you're seeing people in community feeling like they have no other way to resolve conflict, or feeling like they have no other way to access resources, or they're so much in their lifestyle that they have a disregard for human life, and they open fire in a bar full of people, not caring who they kill. And in this instance, over the weekend here in St. Paul, leaving 14 injured and taking the life of a 29-year-old veteran.
And I'm thinking, Georgia, I'm listening, and I'm just thinking about all of the different examples of that. We live in a violent country, and I can't separate the actions of people who, for whatever reason, they have found themselves on this path. Because let's be sure, like, a lot of the crime that we see, it is a statistical observation made by, I believe there's a study from Harvard that shows you that crime is directly an economic phenomenon. So where you see poverty, you're going to see crime. And not only that, right? We got to think about what kind of country we live in. Let's think about the kind of way we honor violence in this country. Everything that we see on television, in our movies, it's violence. And our nation as a whole, our government executes violence on the international stage. It executes violence locally in the police state that's being brought down on the Black community every single day. And so we cannot look at these people and their actions and take them separate from the country that created them. Right? This is part and parcel of our fight in this country.
Yeah, absolutely. And the 29-year-old was a veterinarian. I think I said veteran earlier. Ben, the other question to expound on the point you were making, where are these guns coming from? Because there is not a gun manufacturer that is Black that is in our community. There is not a person who is here selling guns that looks like me or you. And so I want to know also, and this has been a long-standing question, where do these guns come from? And where are the buybacks that we used to see 10, 15, 20 years ago, when you would have police departments who would recognize this increase in gun violence, and they would partner with a Target or a Walmart or a Cub Foods and offer $100 or $200 gift card in exchange to get guns off of the street with no questions asked. You could come, you could bring a gun in, and there would be no questions asked. There wouldn't be a ballistics check just to get the guns off the street. And when we saw those happening at least once a month in our community, back when Minneapolis used to be Murderapolis in the 90s during the crack epidemic, we saw a huge decrease in gun violence because you had men, young men, a lot of them were, yes, at that time, gang affiliated, who wanted out and who didn't see a way out. And so that is providing not only a way out, but you're also giving them resources, right? You're showing them that there is another way. Where is that energy? Because as we're looking at these statistics, this shooting that left 14 people injured in St. Paul, this is not an exclusive story to Minnesota. This is happening all across the country in predominantly Black communities. Our Black men, our Black women, our babies. We had 3 babies shot in the head this summer, 2 of them dead, a 6-year-old dead who was eating a Happy Meal in the back seat, a 9-year-old who was jumping on a trampoline during a birthday party dead. Where is the urgency? Why is this not an issue that is at the forefront of these conversations, every political in this country? If they truly cared about us, a 30% increase in homicide, that's according to the CDC.
Sister Ford, you put it in such clear terms. There's no question about it. There is an epidemic of violence in our country, specifically in our Black community. And as many dog whistles as are forwarded by politicians and political leaders who want to sever the violence from everything that's happening around us, you hit the nail on the head. The fact of the matter is that these guns, we aren't making these guns. We're not flooding our communities with these guns, just like we didn't flood our communities with crack cocaine, but it somehow got there, didn't it? Right. And the reason that this buyback program, and I know we have a video and we also are going to be joined by Dr. Mack. The reason that buyback program is not mathing right now, is not buying back right now, is because it doesn't pay as much as a private prison would get if they put a young Black body in prison. It's a supply and demand. They need supply. And there's plenty of Black bodies that they're willing to get. So the guns come exactly from the same place all the rest of this violence come from, where the crack cocaine comes from. We didn't make it, but we're trying to survive it.
And in this case, there was a 29-year-old, a 32-year-old, and a 33-year-old who were arrested, who are probably going to be serving 10, 20, maybe 30 years. I'm not sure what their charges are, what evidence police have against them. But you're absolutely right. And even reflecting back on Ava DuVernay's documentary 13th that examined the way in which mass incarceration has largely taken the place of slavery. It is absolutely a benefit to corporate America, to broader society, to have a large population of people incarcerated. And when you compare how many people we have in jail to the rest of the world.
That's right. That's right.
You know, it's absurd. And it is in a lot of ways, and not saying that people who act out violently and people who murder, not saying that they shouldn't be arrested, but what is the benefit to getting guns off the street? What is the benefit of mitigating crime when you know that incarcerating people will actually benefit you more? Then there is no benefit. Then it's just like, well, let them do what they do. And unfortunately, that in this country, I feel like it's the cycle we see, that we have to continuously pay the price. If this was an issue, like think about the opioid crisis, think about that pandemic or epidemic, when you had middle class, upper class, white kids or young adults who were adulting, all of a sudden there was all of these federal dollars state dollars, county dollars that were being deployed to mitigate this issue because, God forbid, a white senator from an upper class neighborhood lose his child to an overdose. God forbid that happened. Right now, all of a sudden, we can find money in the budget to mitigate these issues. But when you're seeing Black babies being shot in the head by stray bullets, you need to find some money in the budget. You need to implement some plans to figure it out. You need to keep that same energy that our future generations are important. How is one thing different than the other? When you're talking about our youth dying and you don't have compassion for that bothers me, Ben. That bothers me a lot.
Yeah. No, it troubles me as well. Sister Georgia, I know we're covering a lot. One of the things that actually I want to bring Brother Mack, Dr. Carl Mack, into the conversation here. It's been a while. We haven't had our good brother here for a minute, and it's. I wish we could bring you in on a lighter conversation, Brother Mack. But I know you have some insight into the patterns, the historical patterns, as it pertains to what we're saying. We're seeing just a new form of oppression that we can't quite get a grip on. But man, they sure like to ask us what's going on in Chicago and all these other cities. But how do we address these things?
Well, first of all, good morning, Georgia. Good morning, Brother Ben. And you're right, it's been a while, so good to see you both.
Good to see you.
As I listen to the both of you, clearly the one quote that comes to mind is by Victor Hugo. And Victor Hugo said this: "If a soul is left in the darkness, sins shall be committed. The crime is not he who committed the sin, but he who caused the darkness." See, a lack of gun control causes darkness. The promotion of violence in movies, video games, all the things that you talked about being America as a whole, that's a darkness that's being caused. When these guns are flooding our community, that's a darkness that's being caused. When there's a lack of opportunities, we talked about systemic racism dating back to the moment that we were brought to this country. That darkness is still perpetuating itself. And yes, sins shall be committed. Now, how do we clean this all up? Clearly, there has to be personal responsibility. And when I talk about personal responsibility, although we're focusing here or talking about what happened in the Black community, we're talking about personal responsibility across all communities. Because no one, if we simply focused on personal responsibility in the Black community, that lends a story that we are a violent people. No, we have been a very oppressed people who have been placed in a level of darkness, arguably unlike almost any. Native American brothers and sisters, no disrespect. To no other group, no disrespect. But I'm specifically talking about the darkness that has historically been caused on this community, on our community, back in a time when they separated our families. And now they wonder why you have such a high rate of single parents in the Black community, because this country built itself on disseminating or fracturing our families. So these types of darkness is the thing that comes to mind when I listen to all of the rationale, all the reasons that you both have laid out. It is exactly what Victor Hugo was talking about in that most poignant quote. So if we want to address this problem, it is incumbent upon us, as you said, Sister Georgia, where do we find the funding? Where do we find the resources to illuminate and eradicate the darkness and bring about some change? And that's not to say that there's a panacea to any of these things, which is why there's no such thing as a utopia. You can create as perfect of a community as you want to, and there will still be bad actors. But it is incumbent upon the rest of us to address those bad actors, to hold them responsible. So there's, just as there are a lot of issues behind this violence that is in this country, and being to your point, America itself has been a very violent country. And then when you add into the mix, when you're talking about where these guns, when you add into the mix of this violence, when you add the concept of capitalism, somebody benefiting off of that, we're going to have the multitude of problems that we're now seeing, unfortunately.
And it's interesting to have this conversation on today, which is, or was, Columbus Day, and now has been recognized by 13 states as Indigenous Peoples Day. But I think that also is a window into where we are as a nation, that only 13 states are willing to embrace the truth. And yet the rest of our country is still not ready to let go of this notion that a white explorer named Christopher Columbus discovered America. You know, at what point are we going to take it back and begin to really indoctrinate our children with the truth? And until our entire nation is ready to do that, we're going to continue to see groups, subcultures here in our country that will say that the election is a lie, that will say other truths like climate change are a lie. If we can't get to a place where we as a country agree on the truth, we're going to continue to foster a culture that lacks integrity, that lacks honesty, and that feels confident to move forward on a lie. And so, you know, I want to acknowledge our Indigenous brothers and sisters today. We see you, we recognize you, we value you, we stand in solidarity with you, and we are on your land. This is your land. And I know that there's been just a few stories of situations where land has been given back. And I think that's why we've only seen 13 states acknowledge what today is.
That's right.
It's because once you start moving in that direction and you truly acknowledge the fact that Christopher Columbus did not discover America, it opens up the door to have a much more interesting conversation.
You know, Georgia, what you just talked about, nothing shines a bigger light, speaking of darkness and bringing this quote into fact. A lie unchallenged becomes the truth. So for how long has this lie been told, been taught? And so to now, we talk about the critical race theory and trying to talk about the history, the true history of this country. Unless these lies are challenged, they shall become the truth, which also leads to this quote: he who defines rules. And so white America has defined the history of this country for far, far too long. And that's why it's so important that we now, you know, if you talk about these 13 states, what manner of people in those 13 states decided it is time to tell the truth, which is important as to why we as a people need to pay attention to who we place into these political positions so that we can now have more people who are willing to stand on truth than those who will stand on a lie that for far too long has been unchallenged. So like yourself, and I'm sure Brother Ben is as well, we pay homage to our Indigenous brothers and sisters of this nation. And so to talk about land that was given back to them, you know, how do you give me something that belonged to me? How do you do that? But that is the sickness. That is the sickness of America. And it also says if there's an example of white supremacy, today shines as one of those days, that you are so wrapped into your supremacy that you think because you showed up here, you discovered it. You think that because you saw this great mountain that you have the right to name it Mount McKinley or Mount whatever you decide to do. Our Native brothers and sisters had a name for that. And versus you adopting that name, accepting that name, your that inherent white supremacist part of you feels like you're the one that's entitled to name this land, to claim this land, to do as you see fit, to talk about how this land was, quote, discovered. You can't discover what was already here, who was already here. You can't dismiss those people. But obviously you can if you tell a lie and that lie goes unchallenged.
Brother Mac, it's good to have you back. I just want to make sure that we say with clarity, we go through so many painstaking hurdles to make sure that we speak with a level of clarity and sophistication that is acceptable and palatable to this country. But at the end of the day, the only thing supreme about whiteness is its barbarity. And the best example I've ever I could think of, is Christopher Columbus. And the fact that we celebrate a barbarian in this country who is someone that our indigenous brothers and sisters had to survive. Isn't that something? In this country today, we have the celebration juxtaposed with the survivors of Christopher Columbus. So, Brother Mac, thank you for being back and bringing that into clarity and the focus for us, because at the end of the day, the only thing supreme about whiteness that I have found in my lifetime is its barbarity.
And, you know, the thing that I have grown to really appreciate is the way that my indigenous brothers and sisters honor the earth and show gratitude to all of the things around us, the water, the sun, the plants, you know. And I remember getting a farm tour and hearing plants and seeds talked about as relatives, you know, and there were white folks in the room, and the indigenous sister who was talking about the seed as her relative said, you know, that's why we don't sell our seeds, because we wouldn't sell, you know, who would sell their relatives? And there was just this moment, and everybody just had to laugh, because the white folks in the room know historically they probably would do that. But there is a lot to be learned. And so I want to encourage those of you who don't have a diverse friend group to diversify your friend group. My life was really, really blessed when I was able to forge friendships with indigenous men and women. I learned so much, not just about myself, but about the earth that we live on.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, George, when you think about it, let's look at two examples. America's symbol of greatness is the bald eagle. The bald eagle damn near became extinct because there was no respect paid to this planet. The American buffalo almost became extinct because we paid no respect to it. We literally would just go out there and shoot them by the thousands, the millions, just for the sport. Whereas our indigenous brothers and sisters used the buffalo as a food source. They respected that great animal, and whatever they ate what they killed. Whereas in this country, we will do it simply for sport. And now you have folks with resources who will now go to the motherland of Africa to go on these quote unquote safari hunts. And what are they? It's not like they're going out into the wild. No, they're going to ranches that have these animals sitting there specifically for the sport of killing them. So when we talk about the lack of respect of this planet, if ever we wanted to take a lesson in climate control, how to deal with it, we should return and sit at the feet of our indigenous brothers and sisters and comprehend from them how they respected the sun, the wind, the water, the animals, the land in and of itself. But our arrogance as a country, our arrogance as a people, think that we know more than them. Thus, we labeled them at one point as savages.
Well, Sister Georgia, coming up at the 8:30 hour, we're going to be speaking with an elder, an indigenous elder by the name of Law Sioux from the Dakota Sioux, and Nika. The elder is a Twitch streamer, and Nika is from the Chickasaw Nation, also a Twitch streamer. They're going to be joining us in the 8:30 hour for the Benjamin Dixon Show, and we're going to be discussing these things because it is such a blatant hypocrisy for this country to still honor a barbarian in the midst of the descendants of the survivors of that barbarity.
Well, and Brother Mac, I'm glad that you brought up the issue about climate change and how to honor, you know, the earth so that we don't have all of these issues with the environment, because that is what thousands of people are converging in DC to talk about this week. I've spoken to several people in the media industry, all flying out to DC, several organizers I know flying out to DC. It's anticipated to be one of the biggest moves for environment that we've seen in our time. But we're going to be tracking that. Like I said, I know a few folks out there who plan to send back interviews and footage. But truly, indigenous people have been leading on stopping these oil pipelines that continuously are constructed all across this country, that we're seeing senators and governors approve the construction of these pipelines, despite the fact that we currently have active oil spills that are spilling out in the Pacific Ocean right now. And we looked at what happened in Louisiana 10, 15 years ago, right? And so to see this move of people converge in DC and ask congressmen and women to truly think about our environment, because at the end of the day, you guys, we only get one Earth. We don't get a second shot at this.
Listen, I would say this. There is no doubt that the comforts that we have in this country as Americans is because of these natural resources, oil, for instance. And so it is important that we're able to, if we use this oil, but clearly science is telling us that as a result of using this oil, you can create a situation that causes harm to this community. Now, in order to use this, pipelines have to be given. I would say I would choose a pipeline versus the thousands of trucks that are running across this nation. But through it all of our need to be there, there has to be some common ground that says, if we're going to do this, we have to do this safely. We have to do this in a way that we respect the community. We have to have plans in place to avoid catastrophic damages like what we've seen in the Gulf of Mexico, in our waters. And because of capitalism, people have begun to take shortcuts, right? Because of a disrespect of a lie being unchallenged, now that America has placed our indigenous brothers and sisters on certain lands, and now they've come to discover oil through that land, or they want to run a pipeline through that land, they think, no, we'll just simply run that through. No, you're not going to do that. See, so there has to be common ground and common sense and respect of how we use these natural resources. And again, for my indigenous brothers and sisters, I would say this: if I were on a plot of land and America needed to run a pipeline through my land, the hell with that. You're not running that pipeline through my land. I don't care. And if I do allow you to do that, it would be at something that is beneficial to our people, given what has happened. But to think that you and your arrogance can now say that you put me on a piece of land that you saw as having no intrinsic value, and now these decades, these centuries later, you find that there's a value there, and now you want to come back and come through my land? No, I need you to remember, we are a sovereign nation, and you don't come to this land because that's what you want to do for your benefit. No, it won't be played out that way. And I hope that not only our indigenous brothers and sisters stand up to it, but I hope that all of us, especially as Black folk, that we stand in solidarity with our brothers and sisters.
That reminds me of the North Dakota Access Pipeline, where people did stand up and they got arrested. And what happened there was so unfortunate because it was a violation of treaty rights. And being here in Minnesota, where a lot of the protesting for or against Line 3 has happened, we've seen the same thing. There's just a total disregard for indigenous people, their beliefs, their values. There's a total disregard for the earth, our environment, the natural resources that we need, that we desperately need in order to live, the air, the water, all of these things. And so we are at, I feel like, a fork in the road on this issue, where we really have to make some critical decisions.
Just burning in my soul. I would dare to say that the very people who could piss on a treaty are the very people who at the same time can condone the insurrection that took place on January 6th. I would dare say that could be the very case.
The people who have that level of disrespect for this planet.
That's right.
Yeah.
Are the same people who could look at January 6th and somehow see something good about it. It wasn't an insurrection. It was a tour, right? So again, to our indigenous brothers and sisters, please, and Ben, I'm so honored that these people will be joining us, because we need to hear what their plight is and how we can be there to help support them. And George, I want to thank you so much for bringing this conversation to our community, to the country, to the world, so that we can now stand in solidarity with our brothers and sisters.
Well, we are on the clock, so keep it here for more on The Benjamin Dixon Show.